Babylon is an original epic set in the early days of Hollywood. It's about ambition, it's about excess, it's about hubris, and it's about a society on the brink of massive change. I basically early on became interested in those early days of Los Angeles and Hollywood when they were still getting built and getting kind of figured out. And but the more I sort of looked at that period of time, the more I became aware of just how crazed and insane the people were and the environment was. It was this sort of larger-than-life assemblage of misfits of all stripes who kind of came together to build this city out of nothing, build an industry out of nothing. And there's a certain kind of crazed behavior that comes from that. So I wanted to try to capture in a really unvarnished, unsanitized way just the extremes to which they lived and worked and partied, and what that kind of behavior led to, both good and bad. On a bigger level, I think I just liked the idea of looking at a society in change, and in the case of Babylon, it's a society that's undergoing a change that's both incredibly rapid and really incredibly violent. I remember being shocked when I first started reading just how many suicides there were, all grouped around this short period of time. It gives you a sense of the human cost of this thing, the human cost of, we like to use words like disruption now in a kind of euphemistic or positive way, but, you look at what these people, these human beings went through at this time, and it puts a face on the damage of that kind of that kind of sea change. The operating principle with Nellie was that she's a force of nature, that she's someone who, kind of crashes into everything that she encounters, but there's a kind of magic that arises from that. It's part of why she becomes a star so quickly. It's also part of why she and her career encounter problems so quickly. But she's very much, I would say, kind of a representative of that real Wild West spirit of the time, where the old rules were out the window. The Victorian age was a memory. World War I had demolished all of that. And here you are in this kind of wide open land of California where, the possibilities seem endless. And you've got this mushrooming town, mushrooming industry where people all over the country and the world are flocking like moths to the flame. There's a sort of collective hysteria and madness that comes from that, and she is absolutely, an embodiment of that. She works hard, she parties hard, she lives hard in every way. What I wanted to do with the movie is try to look at the whole organism as a piece. I mean, there's all these individual characters, but really there's also the sort of macro character of the town, of the industry at this moment in time. And so I wanted to try to, parallel some of these paths. Someone who's just rising up with someone who is the sort of current king of the moment. Someone who's knocking on the doors outside looking in, crossed and contrasted with someone who holds the levers of power at that time. And then you sort of see how these tectonic plates shift, because that's really one of the most interesting things I think that that happened at that time. Jack is sort of the uber movie star. He's the highest grossing leading man in the world. When we meet him, he was very much modeled on that kind of early lineage of male movie stars of that time, whether it was John Gilbert, Douglas Fairbanks, Valentino. There's a this kind of ideal of the romantic leading man. At a time when, again, the whole idea, you have to remember, the whole idea of a movie star was this sort of novel concept. So Jack Conrad, he's one of these guys who has reached the apogee of stardom right at that moment, at that fulcrum, where the kind of love and adulation he inspires is really hard, I think, even for today, for us to fathom. It's near, it's like a near deity. Manny is our eyes and ears. The idea for me was to, you've got a world here that's so larger than life. I wanted to show what it might be like to experience that from an outsider's point of view. So the idea of someone who, up till the very beginning of the movie, is, kind of peering in from the outside, kind of knocking on the doors, wishing he were in this thing that he's kind of on the margins of, and using him as our access point, as our, ultimately our guide through the story. Eleanor St. John is a combo, journalist, gossip columnist, fixer, puller of the strings, sort of socialite. She's kind of, this sort of reigning dowager empress. At least I think that's how she would describe herself of Hollywood. She's modeled on a variety of people. I mean, most specifically Eleanor Glynn. But also, as you get a little bit later in Hollywood, obviously, people like Luella Parsons and Hedda Hopper, I think she's someone who I think revels in the power she has to kind of, make or break careers and discover people and whatever the opposite of discover people is, sort of make a point of forgetting people. I think a lot of how the movie was structured to me was also just kind of, it wanted to be structured through the idea of these parties and how the parties of LA, of Hollywood, change, because parties can kind of tell you almost everything you need to know about a society. You see who gets in, who doesn't. You see who rules the roost at the party, who doesn't. Within the party, things, people can move up, people can move down. And of course, it's an excuse to get all your characters together if you're doing a big ensemble piece. Her full name's Lady Fei Zhu. She's a actress, singer, performer, title card writer, a little bit of a sort of a Renaissance character, who just kind of wears a lot of hats, very much like a lot of the people of that time who, might have been mostly defined by one job or another, but really would do a whole variety of different things, either behind the scenes or in front of the camera. Music, of course, had been a big part of silent films in terms of how they were shot, how, you would have mood music on set, you'd go to the theater and music would be playing. But the idea of actually having music tied to the screen, and the idea of what we now call musicals, and putting musicals on screen, that was, that of course was really a byproduct of sound, and a byproduct also of just the desperation that Hollywood felt right at that moment of trying to figure out some way to justify this invention so it wouldn't be just a novelty. So immediately they turned to what what they deemed the popular music of the time was, what music the kids were listening to, and that was that's the type of music that Sydney plays. In LA, it was a lot of the kind of music that they would be hearing in Central Avenue, the Central Avenue clubs. This was basically synchronous with in New York, the Harlem Renaissance was happening at this time. So there was this moment for a certain kind of jazz and a certain kind of music that lent itself to what Hollywood thought it needed right at that moment. And so there's this interesting window where just for a matter of a few years, Hollywood started filling short films and even feature films with black performers, black musicians, black actors. There were all black films, famously like Hallelujah and Hearts of Dixie and things like that, and a whole host of shorts featuring people like Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, and Bessie Smith, just trying to reach out to the music, basically the most popular musicians at the time, trying to kind of yoke them to this new thing of sound cinema. So with Sydney, I wanted to try to kind of tell a little bit of that story, and situate someone who, when we first meet him, is very much in the margins of the film industry and has no real interest in the film industry. He just happens to live in the same city, but he's not at all interested in partaking in this thing called Hollywood. But when sound comes in and he's offered a spot, he might hesitate at first, but ultimately he bites, and we go along the ride. We go along for the ride with him. The hope with this was to sort of demolish the expectations of a period piece, and especially of a movie about old Hollywood, to show that that really on the fundamental level there was no difference between then and now, and you know, I mean, something that happened to me a lot when I was researching or kind of putting this together was, I would stumble upon things that shocked me. I'd stumble upon anecdotes or episodes that would just leave my jaw kind of hanging. That's what I wanted the movie to do, and that's what we don't often get from period movies. Something that can really sort of shock and rattle and take an audience on a real roller coaster ride. That was the hope with this. I think what I was drawn to the most was anytime I would see an image from the time or from research that felt like it could have been today, or felt like it could have been from 500 years ago, or felt like it could have been from the future. The idea was to try to, everywhere we could, show you something that you would not expect from your own kind of preconceived notion of the 20s. Sometimes that meant fashions that predated the 20s. Sometimes it would mean fashions that seemed to post-date it. But again, everything was rooted in fact. I mean, everything was rooted in the photographic record, the oral histories, the research, that we all kind of collectively did. We didn't want anything to be anachronistic. We wanted to be true to the time, but we wanted to be true to the time in a way that would completely subvert any expectations. The hope was to have everyone in the movie, whether it's someone you know or someone you don't, feel surprising, feel somehow like it added a new color to the film that wasn't something you were either expecting or something you'd seen before. One of the things that's amazing working with Brad in whatever, I can imagine whatever role. I mean, he's one of the few people today where I think you get some sense of what the old school movie star really might have been like. That sort of larger than life aura that a star of that time could kind of exude seemingly effortlessly. That's the thing with Brad, especially at this point in his career. You don't see the work. It's completely invisible and effortless, and that's part of what's so magical about it. So having him play a movie star of this era and this ilk, it felt meta in the most beautiful way. But it also felt like it gave us something to actually really collaborate on together, to make it and the performance personal, and to have it be a canvas where he could inform it with his own experiences in a way that hopefully take it beyond just a sort of depiction of a movie star and into something where you really see sort of the raw humanity underneath that. For a role like Nellie, you need an actor who truly has no fear, and can just kind of take the screen as though she's sort of grabbing it by the sides and shaking it to do whatever she wants it to do. That to me is Nellie. That to me is Margot. That's where the two of them sort of merge. I think in many other respects they are incredibly different people, but there's a kind of energy and fervor and hunger that they both share that I think that was something personal to Margot that she was able to tap into. And however she summoned those kind of forces forth, again, she did it in a way that was pretty extraordinary. I've been a fan of Jovan's for a while, but I think what was especially exciting to me about working with him in this role is it felt like he could show a whole new side of himself in this role. Sidney has a swagger to him. He's funny. He's sexy. He's headstrong, and he also goes through a real kind of a real transformation of himself as a person as well. So I needed someone who could tap into that, and Jovan was the perfect person to do it. I did a lot of auditions trying to find someone who could play Faye. And Legion Lee just, it's like that old school thing. It's the triple threat. She can sing, she can dance, she can act. But more importantly than all of that, you know, she just has this kind of way of completely seizing the frame without seeming to do anything. There's, again, an effortlessness to her that just speaks to old school stardom. So it was really exciting to see that quality in someone who whose work I didn't really know. And I think that's what's going to be really exciting for audiences to discover her. Well, the hope with Babylon was to make something that felt like a ride for an audience, felt like a roller coaster, felt like a carnival, and a larger-than-life circus filled with vivid characters, amazing performances, spectacle, excess, comedy, tragedy, the whole range of experiences, the highest highs and the lowest lows. That was the hope, to try to put it all onto one panoramic canvas called Babylon.